if you were following, you see how a leper was healed in the Jordan River when there were better rivers in Syria. These are just not stories for us to read as history. They are what we call contemporary, right now, happening in our lives. We can begin to see. Like many times when I was just walking and you know that you had just this amount of money enough for your transportation, and then suddenly there's more. Where did that come from? Where? From the God, the same God who sent the ravens to the prophet when there were 3 years of famine and there was no food, and the prophet was fed with food sent by God through the ravens. That's the same thing that God does when your cupboards are suddenly filled with supplies that you've never thought, where did these come from? Or when someone begins to say, brother or sister, I just want to share with you the things of God. And here is something. These are things which God is wanting to do in a normal, ordinary way. Not something that is spectacular anymore, but something that is part of our lives as God's people. Let's go back to the book of Acts. When there was the day of Pentecost, there were so many things that happened there. In the day of Pentecost, the church began to grow from 12 to 120 to 5,000 to another 3,000 added. Suddenly, more than about 8,000 people were in the church in just a short span of time. And as the church began to grow, there was this incident with one of the disciples called Stephen. And he was stoned to death because the Jews were very against what he was trying to say. And as this was happening, there was a great persecution and Christians began to flee from so many places. They went all over. At that point, it was only in Jerusalem that the Christians were gathered and they were found there. Because remember, they started as Jews, as people who were practicing the law of Moses. But as they began to spread because of persecution, they settled in many places, and one of the places was in Antioch. And when they were in Antioch, something happened that was not the norm or what they expected. Because they started, as the Christians were there, to minister to their fellow Jews. Because they thought it was only those people called Jews that salvation was available to. That was their whole mindset. If you were not a Jew, you cannot be saved. But something happened in Antioch following what happened in Caesarea. Remember, this was the chapter in chapter 10 when Peter suddenly saw this vision. And there were animals, different kinds of animals that came forth from this cloth that unfolded. And the Spirit of God said, this is what you're going to do. And he began to minister and went to his house of a guy called Cornelius. And this opened the door, and let's pick up the story in Acts chapter 11, when there was the move of God in this city called Antioch. And in chapter 11 of the book of Acts, picking up from verse 19, it says there, so then those who were scattered because of the persecution that arose in connection with Stephen made their way to Phoenicia and Cyprus and Antioch, speaking the word to no one except to Jews alone. But there were some of them then of Cyprus and Cyrene who came to Antioch and began speaking to the Greeks and preaching the Lord Jesus Christ. And the hand of the Lord was with them, and a large number who believed turned to the Lord. These were not Jews anymore. So they were amazed. How can people who are not Jews, or God's chosen, received the Spirit of God. And the news about them reached the ears of the church at Jerusalem, and they sent Barnabas to Antioch. Verse 23 says, Then when Barnabas had come and witnessed the grace of God, he rejoiced and began to encourage them with resolute hearts to remain true to the Lord. When Barnabas witnessed the grace of God. Tonight, I'd just like to share very briefly about being witnesses of the grace of God. A very, very basic truth that perhaps many fail to see because we live in a day and age of accomplishments. Kailangan meron akong gawin para ako'y may tanggapin. Kinakailangan meron akong pagsikapan para ako ay kumita. And that's not wrong because it's very true. But we've got it inverted. We've thought we have to be the one to first do something, not realizing that there was an action before even our own action. Meron na nangyari bago pa tayo isinilang. And it's called God's grace. Witnesses of the grace of God. What is grace? Very simply stated, grace is an acronym for God's resources at Christ's expense. Lahat daw ng karangyaan at kayamanan ng Diyos dahil sa ginawa ni Kristo. Hindi dahil sa pagsisikap mo, pagsisikap ko. Hindi dahil sa pananampalataya mo, pananampalataya ko. Ang kaligtasan natin, our salvation, is not based on merit. You did not do anything to earn salvation. St. Paul in Ephesians chapter 2, verse 8, it says there, For by grace you have been saved through faith. It is what? A gift of God, so that no one can boast. You were saved by grace. Not on anything that you have done, but on what God has done for you. He made the first step. It is His grace, we call it. It is His way of sharing. You don't need to do anything to earn it. You know, can I ask Nathan? Nathan, I'm going to use you for an example. Okay? Can I ask you to come forward? Just come here. Okay? Let's give him a hand. This is Nathan on the eve of his birthday. Right? On the eve of his birthday, I'm going to use him as an example. If I say, Nathan, I want you to work in my house and clean my house. And after a day, he comes to me and I says, Nathan, thank you. Here's 500 pesos for cleaning my house. Okay? That's not a gift. What is it called? It's a salary. Okay? Sweldo niya yan. Bakit? Dahil meron siyang ginawa. Ano ginawa niya? Naglinis ng bahay. Dahil masipag itong batang ito eh. Ang tinig ko sa bahay nila, masipag. Kasi pag, every time mag-dismissal, pag siya in charge, pag mabawal siya, nakita ko, puro siya maglinis ng batang ito ah. Eh, hindi yung by faith. Talagang nakikita ko. So may potential na maglinis. That's a salary. But if, let's say, say I'm just walking today, and I see him, Nathan, here's 500. It's yours. And he would say, for what, Father? I just want to give 500 to you. So, that's grace. For no reason at all, wala siyang ginawa. Maybe may atraso pa nga siya sa akin dahil yung math niya, hindi pa niya sinasabi. Pero binigyan ko pa rin ng 500. That's grace. Amen? Nathaniel Luke. Grace is something which you do not merit. It's a favor given to you for no reason that you have done. It is the graciousness of the giver. That's God's grace. You see, St. Paul, and I'd like to read from Ephesians chapter 3. When St. Paul was commissioned, he said, I became a servant of this gospel by the gift of God's grace. You see, he did not deserve to be an apostle. Many times we think of, Lord, ang daya mo naman, I deserve your favor. Like last Saturday, I was thinking, 23 years of being a priest. That's my anniversary last 23 at 23. Lord, I deserve this. I deserve this reward. You see, it's not many times what we deserve. Grace sometimes is also getting what we do not deserve. I don't deserve to be a priest. Paul was not deserving to be an apostle. God made him so. It was a gift of God's grace, given me through the working of His power. Although I am less than the least of all God's people, this grace was given me. What was that? To be an apostle, to preach to the Gentiles the boundless, unfathomable, unsearchable riches of Christ, and to make plain to everyone the administration of this mystery, which for ages past was kept hidden in God, who created all things. And this was God's intention and His purpose. His intent was that now, through the church, the manifold wisdom of God should be made known to the rulers and authorities in the heavenly realms. Through the church now, this grace was now ready to be shared with others. And it is something that's so vital that we are being called to witness this grace. Think of your life for a moment. Isipin niyo ang buhay niyo. The many things that we have failed in, and yet, in spite of that, God still gave us life. In spite of our rebelliousness, God is not out there counting how many times you sinned, and then how many times you did well. And then at the end of the year, He will balance it. Ano ba ang mas matimbang? Yung ginawa niyang masama o yung ginawa niyang mabuti? Pag mas matimbang yung masama, impyerno ka. Pag mas matimbang yung mabuti, langit ka. Hindi ganon. God's resources was at the expense of the cross. Lahat ng pamana ng Panginoon sa atin ay nasa atin dahil kay Kristo. Hindi tinimbang ka, ngunit wala. Hindi po ganun. Hindi si Kuala. Hindi niya nagkakaroon ng pinaitigin mo kasi kuha na yung loko-loko na sa Jorvina Rodriguez. Yun ang pangalan niya. It's no longer that. You were given the privilege of the sources of all God's provisions in our lives. This is the beauty. So that now, like Paul, we can, through the church, begin to share the same grace with others. Isipin nyo na lang, last Sunday the gospel was about the laborers. You see, we tend to sympathize with the first group. Dahil, daya naman sila. Maghapon sila nagtrabaho, pero isang dinari rin ang natanggap nila. Tulad nung nagtrabaho ng isang oras lang, 5 o'clock. Pero huwag na natin pagkaabala masyado yun. Because we've heard, the teaching, whether it was Father Gary or whether you came to 10 o'clock service, you've seen. Isipin na lang natin, tingnan na lang natin yung dumating ng 5 o'clock. The power of grace that touched their hearts. These people were daily wage workers. Wala silang kasiguraduhan na may trabaho sila sa araw na yun. Unlike a slave, kahit na alipin siya, sigurado na pag uwi niya, meron siyang uuwian. Or a servant, or isang laborer. Pero ang daily wage earner, wala pong kasiguraduhan na meron silang trabaho sa araw na yun. Bago siya umalis ng bahay, sasabihin niya sa mga anak niya, mga anak, sana matanggap ang tatay mo ngayon dahil yun ang pambibili natin ng hapunan. So he goes off to the marketplace. Alas 6, hindi siya napili. Alas 9 dumating, hindi pa rin siya napili. Alas 12, wala pa rin. Wala pa rin kumukuha sa kanya. Magaling naman siyang mason, magaling siyang karpentero. Wala pa rin. Alas 3, wala pa rin. Ano kaya tumatakbo sa isip niya? Sarili niya? Marahil hindi. Marahil naisip niya, ano kaya maiuwi ko sa aking mga anak? Mag-aalas 5 na. Matatapos na ang araw at wala pang tumatanggap sa akin. And then 5 o'clock came. Grace knocked at the door of their lives and said, come to my vineyard and work. He goes to the vineyard, works, expects maybe just a few coins. But he receives a denarius. And he goes home. Could you imagine the thought, no? Pagay ko, meron sa ating nakaranas, umuwi ka. Sasabihin, hindi mo nalaman ano nangyari sa akin ngayon. Wala sana tayong kakainin. Wala na akong pag-asa. Alas 5 na ng hapon, wala nang tatanggap sa akin. Sino pa? Mas nauna yung magagaling, wala akong kaalam-alam. Mas magagaling yung mga skilled workers na nauna. Pero may kumuha sa tatay niyo. Kakain tayo ng hapunan ngayong gabi. Dahil sa grace. The grace of God is so powerful. What did that guy do? Nothing. God provided. Now, doesn't mean that just because of grace, all we do is just sit down. That's another story. That's the next sermon. Grace now gives you the ability to work and respond to the love of God. But I would just like to focus on that first part. We are what we are because of God's grace. You say, wow, pamilya ko. Minsan we don't even appreciate our parents or our wife or husband. But it's God's grace that gave you your family. Maybe you do not deserve that family. Maybe your wife deserves a better husband. Maybe your husband deserves a better wife. But no, God put you together because it's His grace. In spite of my unfaithfulness, God still gave me my wife. In spite of my lack, God still gives me my children. It's God's grace. And we can see how powerful that is if we only can hold on to it. Isang witness to the grace of God is a man who perhaps could not boast in anything. His father was a mining engineer. Pinagmamalaki ng tatay niya, mining engineer ako. Ikaw, ano natapos mo? Pero it's by God's grace, itutuloy niya ang kwento ng buhay niya. Harris, can come here and share the grace of God.